Because once you are connected with something as sacred as nature, something that is alive, you could not help but to respect it, appreciate it, love it, and take care of it.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Co-Management Commons Show. This episode is another adaptation of one of my co-management classes where we hosted a very special guest, Elder and Dr. Albert Marshall, who many of you may have heard of associated with the concept of two-eyed seeing. In this episode, he will be more properly introduced by my partner, Dr. Ashlee Cunsolo, who has had a longer friendship with him, and she facilitated this discussion that you're going to listen to shortly. The concepts that Elder Marshall will talk about are really at the heart of co-management and what it means to truly respect perspectives on the world and what it means to come together in action for an improved planetary health in the future. It is a great honor to get time with Elder Marshall, and I'd suggest it's a good idea to just get your favorite cup of tea or coffee and really sit back and listen to his wise advice. So with that, I will get this podcast started. It's a great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Ashlee Cunsolo, who's been doing leading community-based research work now since 2008, working in both Inuit and Mi'kmaq communities and contexts, and has built many great relationships and very relevant to the conversations that we're having. Dr. Cunsolo is also a founding member of Nature Canada's Women for Nature. And as a health geographer, her research is in the area of ecological grief and mourning. And Dr. Cunsolo is also an academic administrative leader now, and in recent years has led and brought to fruition a newly formed Labrador campus of Memorial University that has a one-of-a-kind constitution in that it's given Indigenous people to right to vote in this setting, and also has seats on the academic council. So if you can imagine all of the bureaucracy with provincial governments and universities who are quite large and have their own senates and committees and everything, to bring together those diverse opinions and perspectives and have a constitution like that accepted is certainly no simple feat. So welcome, Ashlee, and she has known Albert for quite some time now and has worked closely with him. Welcome, Ashlee.
It's great to be here, and it's great to meet everyone virtually. I've been hearing lots of amazing things about the class and the visitors, and I'm also delighted, as he is just so wonderful to see you, Albert. He's just such a special person for myself and Jamie, but also for many, many, many people around the world. And of course, everyone who knows and works with him closely values and cherishes him tremendously. And he's certainly no stranger to many, many people who work in this area. So even if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting with him, most people are very familiar with his groundbreaking concept of two-eyed seeing that he and his wonderful late wife, Merdina Marshall, gave to the world as a gift to understand how we bring multiple knowledge systems together. So, Albert, I'll give you a bit of a formal introduction, and then I'll add some personal pieces in about how much you have meant to myself and all who are lucky enough to work with you over the years. So Albert originally hails from the Mi'kmaq nation of Eskazoni in Unama'ki, Nova Scotia, if anyone's had the pleasure of being to beautiful Cape Breton. Albert is the designated spokesperson for the Mi'kmaq nation for all things related to natural resources and environmental issues, and really has been traveling the world extensively since the 70s, sharing his knowledge and his wisdom on these topics, but really pushing for Indigenous rights, Indigenous advocacy, and Indigenous leadership in all areas: cultural revitalization, language, education, and of course, all things related to the environment and how we live and work and treat and respect the natural world. His tireless passion and his incredible intellect and the ability to share complex knowledge systems together with diverse audiences all across the world has really led to Eldred Albert being recognized by many, many accolades. A Lifetime Achievement Award by the Inspire Association, which is incredible, which is given out every year to recognize people who have done truly magnificent things over their lives. He's received several honorary doctorates, including from Cape Breton University, where he was recognized for starting really the first of its kind program in Canada with Dr. Cheryl Bartlett and Merdina Marshall on integrative sciences, which was a full undergrad program, bringing together natural and Indigenous sciences together in a really remarkable way. Really, Albert has been a tireless advocate for everything and everyone. And when you meet him, his infectious enthusiasm and his wisdom just completely changes who you are. And I know when I first met Albert, goodness, back in 2013, I felt like I had just completely changed the course of my life when I ended up spending time with him. And I've been lucky enough to work with him and learn from him and call him a dear friend and cherished mentor all over these many years. And we're lucky enough that he still will work with us and come to Labrador from time to time, and was just here a few weeks ago working with our students and our staff and our faculty, and everyone still talks about it every time we meet. So Albert, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you here. I'll let you say a few words of welcome, and then I think we'll get started in the discussions.
Yeah, well, Ashlee. Well, you're sitting there, yes, dear mio. It's going, like it's cool. What's good as that way, Kisano das good as. You know what, she is good, collateral garden for squad. Raman much gray one people will upset you, Hideo Kogomana. Thank you very much for that introduction. My name is Albert Marshall, and I am from the Moose Clan. And I am from Migamagi. But I do choose to live in a community called Eskisoni here in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia.
Albert, before we jump into the conversation, I'll also share with everyone that you had a very special birthday yesterday. It was Albert's 85th birthday, and he got to celebrate all over. So we're going to celebrate you too from coast to coast to coast here. We're so grateful to be able to celebrate your birthday a day late with you and have this time together.
Thank you.
So, Albert, I think one of the things that people would probably really like to hear from you is the concepts of two-eyed seeing and how you started it and what brought you to it. And also, one of the things that I've been hearing you talk about lately, too, is how interesting that for 20 plus years, you've been using this concept and promoting this concept of two-eyed seeing. And it's only just in the last little while really taking off, but you have since developed that concept further and bigger, and you're so much further ahead than the rest of us on this concept. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what it means to you and how you're kind of working on it now. And then we'll move into kind of how it links to people who are working, say, in fisheries and in the fisheries sciences and the natural sciences.
Thank you. A little bit of correction there. I only coined that concept. But that concept, I believe, is always been inherent to the culture that I'm very familiar with, and that's Mi'kmaq, in which you always look at everything from another perspective. Of course, most cases, you don't look at another perspective to question the integrity of it, but rather, how can I constantly strive to improve my situations and my perspectives by looking at it as to how can I improve or fine-tune the action so that hopefully next time it will be much more harmonious with nature. And if I am hunting and gathering, I might be a little more successful. But most importantly, it's a constant reminder in which every action that I do take has to be in harmony with nature. And if for some reason my action is not harmonious, then individually or collectively, we have to come together and see how can we mitigate that action, bring it back to balance again. Of course, currently now, we have to somehow, again, use that 2IC in concept to make sure that the action that we're going to be embarking on will be ecologically sustainable. And if it is not ecologically sustainable, then let's use our cognitive minds to come up with an alternative that's not going to be as harmful as what was originally conceived. Because it is our inherent, I believe, responsibility of ensuring that during our short stay here, our actions will not compromise the ecological integrity of the area, nor will it negate the opportunities for the present and for the future as to how they can and should be able to sustain themselves. And overall objective, of course, is that your objectives is to try everything in your power to ensure that the future generations will hopefully have a better opportunity of sustaining themselves, learning from nature, and living with nature through the examples and actions that we put forth. So 2IC, in my humble opinion again, I think it has to be a fundamental principle as to how we go through life, in which we can sustain ourselves without compromising the integrity of the area. And of course, now we have to be very mindful that our actions also do not compromise the cleansing capacity of the system. So by being mindful that every action we take will not compromise the integrity of the area, and that's also be mindful that at the rate of extraction at this point in time is something in which it has to be thought of and come up with a better alternative. That with the rate of extraction, I think it's safe to say that she can't no longer regenerate herself. And looking at the injections of toxins, the rate of injections of toxins, she can't cleanse herself. Therefore, I believe she needs us now, not only to mitigate and to restore the damage that we have created, but also to ensure that the future actions that we will take will always be in harmony with her. Because I believe we have this wonderful energy called science. Science could be the instrument in which it would help us of ensuring that these actions will be in harmony with nature. But unfortunately, I believe in extreme cases, science has pretty much just been used as an arm of destruction. And when we do invoke our 2IC, we can see then that I think it's about time that not just in reflections, but reflections overall as to how much more harm can we impose upon her through extraction or through injections of toxins. I believe that is the question that should motivate us to ensure that individually and collectively, in our cultures, of course, that is the responsibility that's inherent to every member, in which if someone has forgotten what their inherent responsibilities are, then the others the others will remind them that if they cause harm, they have to mitigate it. So with that collective effort and consciousness, I believe it's safe to say that the Aboriginal people of this hemisphere has somehow managed to coexist in this complete system called environment without them ever compromising the integrity of the area. And I believe if we're patient enough, we can seek those examples and ways as to how can we continuously sustain ourselves without causing such harm to the very source of life in which we all depend upon. Because right now, I believe, as this concept implies, to I see or Ed Wapton, is to teach you and to remind you that whatever action we take has to be in harmony with nature. And if not, then it is our inherent personal responsibility or collective responsibility to find an alternative, because I don't believe any of us could live now totally off the land. We now have to enter ourselves into another wage economy, into an economy called wage economy. But at the same time, we also have to be very mindful. A lot of our brothers and sisters have somehow have been disconnected from nature. And I think it's about time that we create programs to help people to reconnect with nature. Because once you are connected with something as sacred as nature, something that is alive, you could not help but to respect it, appreciate it, love it, and take care of it. So these are the questions, I believe, that we can ask ourselves collectively, that we cannot be business as usual, because looking at our current state of our environment, with the severity of storms and etc., we and the visionaries have said there will come a time in which there will be a need for all people to come together. And once they come together, they will establish a relationships. And the fundamental principle of any relationship, of course, from our understanding, is through the exchange of stories. And it's through this exchange of stories that we will know where this person comes from and who they are. But most importantly, we would learn why that person is here and the gifts that they are bringing forth. And with those gifts that we can recognize, it will not only cement the relationship, but it will cement the dependency, because it's impossible for one individual to try to understand the complexity of nature. That's why I believe in our territory, for example, which encompasses all the provinces, eastern provinces here, it was imperative for our ancestors to subdivide our territory into 7 ecological zones. And each zone, of course, will create an opportunity for the people in that area to become intimately knowledgeable and connected to it, and to oversee the overall territory. We had to come together regularly to ensure that no one is over-harvesting, no one is misusing the territory. And with that healthy lifestyle, it has somehow our clusters have managed to coexist with this complex system without ever compromising the integrity of the area. But of late, we have been somehow being led to distraction. We have been led to believe that we don't need nature. But in essence, nature doesn't need us, we need her. So I believe the time has come now, though, in which people are beginning not just to ponder, but to come together as to how can we come together and map out the kind of a sustainable future that needs to be in place, so that not only this generation here will benefit, but also will ensure that the future generations will also have the same hopefully have a better opportunities than the ones that were when we came on. So 2IC, and I believe, to me again, has to be a fundamental principle of how we go through life, in which we look at everything from another perspective. And in most situations, when we see another perspective which could improve the current situation, therefore, I believe that concept, if it's applied in a good way, it will become action-oriented. And that action that is going to be required is going to be constantly guided by the spirits of our ancestors, how they have successfully managed to coexist without compromising the integrity of the earth. So these are the things I believe as a result when we seriously look at our situation, especially when we look at our natural world, because natural world is such a complex system and it's a constant flux. Therefore, I think the more we engage ourselves into that sense of projections or reflections, help us to constantly check where we are and where we need to improve. And I believe the time is now, because when we look at the overall state of our current environment, there are so many ways in which we can dwell on hopelessness. But if we can somehow be successful of maintaining and creating harmony among each other, then together, by coming together and coming up with a better ways how do we move or how to move into future, we'll not only create hope, but also will create an opportunity for the future generations, because they solely depend upon us. They solely depend upon us to ensure the earth will be the environment will be much more healthier and promising for them. So, and in one way that I think has to be done in the way I see it is that I don't know exactly the degree of people that have been disconnected. So we need institutions to help us by allowing us to develop land-based trainings into our education system. Because through that land-based training, I believe we will not only understand the complexity of nature, but also we will be reconnected to it again, in which we can and we will be able to supplement our existence to whatever little land base we have, instead of totally being independent on full Soviet shelter, for example, because we're somewhat blessed here in the eastern part of this country, in which we still have sufficient land base in which these things can happen. But it will never happen unless we come together. And coming together, I believe, we can then make ourselves a position in which the people that needs to hear will hear us. Because right now, it seems that environment is not really a top priority. Every government and industry is so happy of continuing business as usual. So 2IC, and again, I believe, will somehow help us to come to understanding that there is a great need for a transformative change. And that transformative change, I believe, has to be from all of us. And because it's just like I may not be able to sustain myself in your territory because I am not intimately knowledgeable and connected to that area. But if there is a relationship between I and someone from there, I can use that resource to help to guide me and to direct me as to where and how I should be able to sustain myself.
Thank you so much, Albert. There's always so much. I have like 2 pages of notes already. And one of the things that I always think about, and I've been really grateful to hear you speak for so many years on Two-Eyed Seeing, is the ways in which right from the conception for you and Merdina, it was always about the connection to land and sustainability. So it wasn't just about bringing in two different ways of knowing, the indigenous science and the Western science. It was actually doing so to enhance our relationships on this earth with other humans and the natural world. And what I find really interesting is sometimes when different scientists try to incorporate indigenous knowledge in, it's not from that perspective. It's more almost sometimes box checking for some people. For others, it's because they're working on the territory. In others, they're trying to do it in a really good way, but they forget that at the core of this idea of bringing it together is so that we can ensure, as you said, the integrity and the cleansing capacity and the renewability of the natural environment. And so that the way that you have always linked it to then the Mi'kmaq conception of sustainability. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that too, and about the importance of always keeping that at the core of all of our sciences, no matter what we're doing.
Well, initially, when our environment was in a pristine condition, we can comfortably say we can take what we need, how much we need. But looking at our environment currently, I believe we have to refine our perspectives in which, and to understand the state of our environment, the state of whatever we are, whatever sustained us, is only to take what could be safely taken. And to do that, I believe, to me, it's imperative that the traditional knowledges alone will not suffice without the aid from the scientific, because we have done so much harm that we need science, not only to mitigate and to restore the damage that has been done, but to come up with ways in which material that we will need and use in going about sustaining ourselves will have to be something in which they will not be the instrument of harm, but instrument of sustainability. For example, I believe, as I said, we have exhausted the carrying capacity of the system, in which it can no longer regenerate itself with the rate of extraction. Whether it's agriculture, I believe we have to seriously look at the current system that's on hand. And is it ecologically sustainable and biologically sustainable? If not, where is science to help us to come up with a way in which the systems will be designed to be in harmony with nature, not to harm nature, but to be in harmony with nature. And I believe science can do that. And this is what was in our minds many, many years ago, when that discussions first started, of how can we put that into classroom. So by the autumn, which means you're putting the two knowledges together, Western science in this case, and the traditional ways of knowing and being, and use those two perspectives to create a way in which the greatest benefit that will be seen will be the ones that need it the most. And that's the creatures that we solely depend upon, the other life form, whether it's on water, air, or underground. So we're now in an era in which we have something that our ancestors did not have, or maybe they didn't even need it, but certainly we do need now, because we have to try to chart a way in which less dependency on imported goods, because we don't know what's in them, and ensuring that as we are working with the land, the substances that we will need will not cause further harm, but will actually will enhance. Because one thing that occurs to me is that I'm constantly hearing, for example, farmed fish is not safe to eat, especially pregnant women. So that should guide us then to look at that from holistic perspective. How can we meet our objectives without furthering creating harm to the very source of life in which we all depend upon? So these are just a few points, I believe, that we can build on, because the overall objective has to be that because I may be inherently knowledgeable to my general area, and I could only imagine the complexity of nature. But if I am doing everything I can in the right way, other areas will benefit my efforts and vice versa. So when we use the word holistic, it's not just our interconnectivity, interdependency with nature, but also with humans. Because more than ever, I believe, we now have to incorporate or integrate Western science, because we need Western science to begin the process of mitigation. How can we mitigate some of those areas that have been heavily impacted by industry or by use? And what can we safely use to mitigate that area? So at least, especially the waters, at least clean up the water so at least they can be put back into the system. I guess I do realize here in Nova Scotia, for example, we have zillion liters of contaminated water untreated. And I believe if we were to put our efforts to that effort could also generate just as much economic opportunities, which is our overall objective anyway. I think what we have to keep emphasizing is that when now we're going to come together and share our reflections and use those reflections to craft the kind of a future that we will need. So the future will benefit our efforts. So there is no individual solutions, but those individual ideas and suggestions certainly will create something in which we can all come together and map out whatever actions that will be required, in which it will not only benefit us, but it will benefit the source of life in which we all depend upon.
Thank you so much. And I'm wondering, just before we switch to the questions, I know the Unama'ki Institute for Natural Resources has done a lot of work specifically around Mi'kmaq and Indigenous fisheries, and that you've been a part of a lot of those discussions. And we have a room full of amazing fisheries scientists from all across the country. And I was wondering if you could share some of the really interesting and groundbreaking work that's happening through UINR and the partners and a lot of the Mi'kmaq fisheries rights and recognitions processes that are going on.
Well, first of all, I believe the most profound way that I can express it is that when you integrate Western science with traditional knowledges of that geographical area, Western science is great of dissecting a part of something so that they can create some terminologies from it. And when you integrate traditional knowledges into it, you will know the physical characteristics of something. But with the overlaying of traditional knowledge, you can add on the spiritual element in which the traditional knowledge could also help science how this certain creature or certain plant is dependent on the rest of the creation. So by knowing the reason why something exists, then I think we can then look upon it differently, in which we will never see it as an object, but as a subject, something that is alive. Most traditional knowledges, I believe, are very much inherent in that way of thinking, which that everything that's alive is both physical and spiritual. And rather than going to that spiritual domain element of it, the greatest part of that, of course, is that when something is alive, then you have to respect it, appreciate it, and try to understand as much as you can. But most importantly, you will become akin to it, and you will protect it to the best of your ability. You will not allow it to be abused, because this is something that not only I, but every creature depends upon, in which that dependency maintains. The physical part of that element is a food source for something else. And that food source is what I think what we can safely call, we will create a healthy biodiversity. And the way I understand about that biodiversity is that if every part of nature becomes one, then we will then have a healthy environment. But as we are eradicating certain species from our natural world, I like to question at what degree are we shortening the effects of biodiversity? Because every creature, I think, has a purpose. And that purpose overall, including us, is to provide for the uncommon or for the existing creatures or critters or humans. So dependency, I think, is something in which, if we truly understand and believe the dependency, we would make sure then that no matter where we are, our efforts will always be driving to ensure that my actions will not compromise the integrity of the area. And if I do, well, then we have to find a way, individually or collectively, to mitigate the damage that might be created. Now, UINR and CEPI has been in existence for 25, 30 years, in which even today, we had a meeting today and discussing different roles. When we have an Aboriginal component into an initiative, their main objective has to be, yes, Western science has such a wonderful ability to do things and to dissect things and to analyze things. This traditional component to it, I think, has to be, their prime responsibility has to be that no matter what Western science may suggest, we have to be very adamant of saying you have to include our Aboriginal ways and understanding of it, because after all, have we not been able to coexist in this complex system called environment for thousands and thousands of years? So therefore, I believe there are lessons in that in which we can use currently to use as to how can we live in an ecologically sustainable lifestyle.
Thank you, Albert. So we have some questions and we have some comments. So I'll start with the first one from Anne Marie. Says, many thanks to Albert for spending part of his birthday week with us. So I agree. Happy birthday again, Albert. She says, I came into this session thinking of two-eyed seeing as a different way of seeing and thinking. Would I be misinterpreting if I think of two-eyed seeing less as seeing and more of a way of living? And then she says, for example, living with a goal of keeping in balance and incorporating multiple perspectives is a tool along with good science for keeping in balance.
Well, first of all, I believe if there's any misconception that this concept is not inherent to the Aboriginal ways of thinking, but rather it's an invitation in which each person will look at something from their lens or from their perspective, and for them to share their perspectives. And I believe we can then map out or create a lifestyle in which it'd be much more ecologically sustainable. Because the lessons that I may learn in my geographical area and lessons someone learns from the other geographical area, in which I can use and learn to improve my ways and vice versa. So two-eyed seeing, then, I think its original intent was, how can we integrate Western science to the Aboriginal ways of thinking by creating something in which people could become very comfortable of entering into some form of a relationships. And through that relationships, we can identify or at least sense that each individual has a certain gift in which that gift could be applied and enhance something for others. So this is about way in which that was the intent to bring forth knowledges from the past from an Aboriginal perspective and not knowing actually what the knowledge is that we will need from the Western side, but to seek way in which how can we continuously work in a spirit of collaboration and a spirit of learning from each other. Because through this learning from each other, we can come up with something in which it will not only benefit us individually or regionally, but most importantly, our efforts. The natural world will benefit from our efforts because it solely depends on the kind of an action that we commit ourselves to. Because we have something that no other creature has, and that's the mind. And that mind has an ability to transform so many things, even nature, in either way, either a good way or a negative way. And this is something I believe that can and can be used to guide us into the future. That yes, we have something that no other creature has. So let's use that for the benefit of all. And that benefit of all, I think, in my mind, implies not just for the human, but it will benefit the other life form in which we solely depend upon.
Thank you, Albert. So there's another comment. It's actually a two-part comment because someone else chimed in. So Robin's written, "Thank you for such an inspiring talk. I also have 2 pages of notes, and I'm sure there's more now because I know mine are more now too. As Ashlee mentioned, when we work with Indigenous communities, we tend to be focused on specific questions, species, or ecological and management questions, and even when the intentions are good. Your talk inspires us to reframe how we see this work as part of a much greater need for coming together. This is both exciting and very humbling. Thank you." And then Catherine wrote, "I totally agree with you. I'm very humbled and a little shameful. I still have so much unlearning to do and reframing." I think, Catherine, we all have lifelong unlearning and reframing every day. I think that's part of the wonderful work that Elder Albert challenges all of us to do, is that unlearning and reframing and coming together. So there's a comment from Luke Albert. He says, "I was really struck with your sharing, paraphrasing, that the fundamental characteristics of relationships is the exchange of stories, and that this eventually can lead to the realization of mutual dependence, interdependence. I'm curious if you can share more about this and maybe good ways to exchange our stories in appropriate settings and ways, especially given the colonial history of trying to suppress Indigenous stories and the imposition of settler colonial stories."
Well, that's a very profound question. But I think one of the key points is that by constantly being very mindful, as this technology is evolving, it cannot and it will not be able to transform our world into human creation. It's going to be us to determine that this wonderful energy or knowledge called science will be used in a responsible way. And we can transform that energy to be the arm of mitigation and healing rather than in the arm of destroying nature. So by expanding our perspectives and constantly looking at not just how we got here and in the current situation, of course, is we have to say with an elevated voice, there wasn't much thought put into how our natural world can be sustained. But I tend to believe that natural world the perspective has been changed from a subject to an object. That's why I believe people are not concerned if and when they hear or see of a project that will not be ecologically sustainable, and what will be the repercussions. But by embracing and seeing nature as being alive, and by like we remind ourselves on a regular basis by saying nature has rights, we humans have responsibilities, are responsible. And with that guiding principle, I believe it will ultimately and inevitably change our perspectives, how we see, how we look upon nature. Nature is not an object, it's a subject. It needs to be nurtured, appreciated, respected, and loved.
Yeah. Well, Albert, thank you so much. I mean, as per usual, spending any amount of time with you and with the gifts that you bring to this world. You talked a lot about the importance of sharing stories and learning about other people's gifts. And I think you've certainly demonstrated the many, many gifts that you bring to the world, and that it's always such a pleasure and an honor, and always so much to learn, and so much. I love the use that Catherine had around reframing, so much to learn, to unlearn, and then to reframe about how we're going to move forward in the world together. So thank you for all that you give us, and all that you challenge us to change our mindsets and change our actions and live better in this world.
Yes, the world is a better place for sure when we truly hear each other with respect and can incorporate the vast amount of knowledge that we collectively have. The future doesn't have to be as dire as the pathway it feels like we are on some days. I'm sure each of us probably will take away different messages from this podcast and how it relates to the co-management of fish and wildlife. For me personally, I definitely heard that there is a responsibility for us to think about how we spend our time on Earth, and are we leaving it better than we found it? We have a responsibility to future generations. And another theme that I am starting to hear more consistently from multiple Indigenous thinkers is the need to protect and enhance Indigenous knowledge systems, and institutions need to play a role in that. If we truly value Indigenous knowledge, we all have a responsibility to find ways to make sure it exists in the future, and certainly to mitigate any modern day risks that are posed to passing on that knowledge. So I think that's very important and something for us to reflect on, think about, and get beyond just the idea of how do we document or integrate this valuable type of knowledge, but we also have responsibilities. And if you've been enjoying this podcast, please remember to like or subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, or Apple. I'm hoping that people are getting value out of it, and it is bringing more awareness to why implementing co-management relationships in a good way does matter. So take care, and I'll be back again really soon. Hi, I'm Dr. Jamie Snook, and thank you for listening to another episode of the Co-Management Commons Show. Honoring the spirit and intent of agreements with Indigenous peoples is an important form of reconciliation and social justice, and educating ourselves about opportunities with co-management is time well spent. This conversation continues, so please like, share, subscribe, and visit www.comanagement.ca. Join me again next time for another interesting discussion about the co-management of fish and wildlife in Canada and around the world.